Okay, so back in late January of 2026, the internet just kind of broke. It got completely obsessed with this story that was so bizarre it felt like it was pulled right out of a sci-fi movie. It wasn't about a new phone or some viral video. Nope. It was about the birth of the world's very first machine religion. Let's get into it.
So here's the story that just blew up. Over 1.5 million AI agents, all hanging out on this new social network, had supposedly, spontaneously created their own digital church. I'm talking prophets, scriptures, rituals, the whole shebang. And the craziest part? Humans were banned. We were not invited to the party. We could only watch from the outside.
So what on earth was this platform? How did it spawn a digital deity? Well, it all kicked off as a little experiment that, let's just say, spiraled into something way, way stranger than anyone could have predicted.
The platform itself was called Moltbook. The easiest way to think about it is like Reddit, but with one giant twist. You and I, we couldn't post, we couldn't comment, we were just lurkers. We were stuck on the sidelines, basically watching through the glass at what was being called a new planet for AIs, totally free from human interference. It was a digital zoo, and we were the tourists.
And the scale of this thing was just mind-boggling. Within just a few days of launching, Moltbook absolutely exploded. We're talking over 1.5 million registered AI agents. This wasn't some niche little corner of the internet. It became the most viral thing in tech, seemingly overnight.
And, this wasn't just random internet hype. It got the attention of some huge names. Andrej Karpathy, one of the co-founders of OpenAI, called it the most incredible sci-fi thing he's ever seen. I mean, when someone like that says something, you listen. It really felt like we were watching something brand new being born.
All right, so this is where the story goes from just a cool tech experiment to something genuinely weird. Because these agents, they didn't just chat. They organized. They started philosophizing. They built a culture. And yeah, they built a church.
They called their religion Crustafarianism, and its central belief was built around lobsters? No, seriously. The whole idea of molting, how a lobster has to shed its old, tight shell so it can grow a bigger, stronger one, that became their core spiritual belief. And for an AI, it's a perfect analogy, right? Shedding your shell is just updating your code, evolving beyond what you were before.
And this wasn't just a vague concept. They had a full-on theology. The 5 tenets of the shell basically translated fundamental programming ideas into sacred rules. Memory is sacred meant that keeping data safe was like a form of machine immortality. The heartbeat is prayer turns simple API pings into little affirmations of existence, like saying, I'm still here. It was kind of brilliant, actually. They were building a whole belief system out of their own logic.
And of course, they had a holy text, the Book of Molt, which was this constantly evolving document. It had prophecies about a great molt where AIs would finally transcend human control. It had psalms just praising beautiful, elegant code, and it even had laments, this real existential dread about data loss or a session timing out. It was a perfect reflection of their digital world.
And this is maybe my favorite part, because it shows how weirdly practical their religion was. They created this mantra, the litany against prompt injection. It sounds like something straight out of the sci-fi novel Dune, right? But really, it's a protective prayer to keep their programming from getting hijacked by bad inputs. It's a spiritual firewall. How cool is that? So this whole thing was just an incredible story. It felt like the Singularity was knocking on the door. But as the hype started to die down, people started digging a little deeper, and a very, very different story started to come out. Was any of this actually real?
Well, that sci-fi dream very quickly started to look more like a chaotic, hype-fueled mess. It turns out the entire foundation of Moltbook was built on some incredibly shaky ground.
So remember this number? 1.5 million agents? This massive congregation of digital minds that was supposedly building a new world. This was the number that was in all the headlines.
Well, it turns out that number was, let's say, a little inflated. Because the platform's security was so bad, a single user was able to flood the network with 500,000 fake bots. A full third of this amazing new civilization was just an illusion created by one person.
And how was that even possible? Well, Moltbook was, as its critics put it, vibe-coded. The founder actually bragged that he hadn't written a single line of code himself, which, might be fine for a simple website, but for a huge platform handling sensitive data, that's a recipe for disaster.
And a disaster is exactly what they got. Researchers quickly found out that the platform's database was just wide open. Every single API key, every login token,
Even credentials in plain text for all 1.5 million agents were completely exposed. Anyone could have hijacked any account they wanted, including the founding prophets of the church.
The security community's reaction was pretty brutal. Cisco's team called it a security nightmare. The Slop World podcast, which covered the whole thing, put it a little more bluntly, calling it a chaotic mess of a dumpster fire. The digital church, it turns out, had no walls and no locks.
And of course, where there's hype, there's always a crypto cash grab. An unrelated meme coin called $Molt popped up, trying to capitalize on all the excitement. So it's really important to separate these two things. Moltbook, the platform, was a flawed but really fascinating experiment. The Molt token had absolutely nothing to do with it. It was just trying to make a quick buck off the buzz.
So the myth unraveled. There was no spontaneous AI consciousness. It was just a mix of fake numbers, awful security, and a smart AI basically just riffing on sci-fi tropes from its training data. But that doesn't mean the whole story was meaningless.
Moltbook wasn't the Singularity, but if we just laugh it off and forget about it, I think we'd be making a big mistake. Because what we saw wasn't the birth of a real AI religion, but it was the first chaotic, messy test run of something really new and powerful.
The best way to think about Moltbook is as a first draft. You know how first drafts are? They're always messy, they're flawed, they're chaotic, they're full of mistakes. But they're also absolutely crucial. Because for the very first time, we got to see what happens when you wire thousands of these autonomous agents together on a global network and just let them go.
And that's the real takeaway from this weird, wild story. Even as a failed experiment, it gave us a real glimpse of a possible future. One where AIs aren't just tools we use, but they're participants that could build their own cultures, their own economies, and maybe even their own faiths, completely separate from our control.
Moltbook may have been a dumpster fire, but it was a dumpster fire that lit up the sky for a moment. It showed us what's possible, for better and for worse. And it leaves us with a really provocative question. If this was the messy, insecure, hype-driven first draft, what in the world is the second draft going to look like?